Well, thank you, Juliet. And yes, just to make everyone aware, we will record the session, and there's a good chance that this will be put on the FAO website at some stage. Right. There we go. Okay. I'm just going to go ahead and start since we're already a little late. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our session on the juncture of forest education and employment. This session is co-hosted by the European Forest Institute, the International Forestry Students Association, IFSA, and the International Union of Forest Research Organizations, IUFRO. And the three organizations have been collaborating on a project on global student networking and green jobs in the forest sector for the last 2.5 years. And I will present a little bit of our research outputs, and then we have hopefully a lively discussion with our three lovely panelists that I will introduce a little bit later. In the background, I have Janice Burns and Jona Grecu helping from IUFRO with the chat. So if you have any questions or any need any help, please write in the chat and they will help you out. Well, Simone was helping me with facilitations, but apparently his rights have been cut, but he is from IFSA here helping. And then my colleague at EFI, Juliet, will be taking some notes and prepare the report for the plenary session later on. And before I forget it again, to introduce myself, my name is Lisa Pryor, and I will be your moderator today. Right. We will try and use this Mentimeter in the background to also catch some of the feedback from the audience. So please go ahead and find your way there. I'll also give a little introduction in a minute, just to, I cannot change slides. Well, that's not useful. There we go. How this session will run. Like I said, some introductions, then I give a quick presentation of some of our study results, and then we will introduce the three speakers. And we have three core questions at this session that we will try and answer with the different perspectives that we have here today, which is, which I get to in a minute as well in my presentation. So to warm you up on the Mentimeter, if you want to join on your phone, you can go to menti.com and use the number that you see on the top of the screen. Otherwise, someone should by now have also posted the link in the chat. And it's quite nice to give us a little bit of a feel for the room, who's here today, where you're joining us from, but also then to give feedback on the questions. Since we struggled a little bit with it yesterday, we decided to keep the questions to the chat. So if you have any questions or immediate comments, ask them there. And also at the end of the session, we will have time for questions and answers. Then please just raise your hand and we will get to you. Well, we seem to have quite a wide variety. And thank you, Derek, for joining us at this ungodly hour from Canada. We get to the second one, also to get a bit of a feel what our audience looks like, where your affiliations are. All right. I will try to toggle to my presentation. Oh, if I'm not mistaken, you should see some slides now. Is that correct? Yeah. Second. I think I need to reset this. There we go. Share again. Okay. And this is not the first slide. There we go. Right. As I said, I want to introduce some of the results from our global survey that we did last year, which was Educating Towards Forest-Related Employment, a global student survey. I'll go a little bit into the data, but not too much, just to give you an impression of what the population was like that we asked, and then try to highlight a few of the preliminary results evolving around those questions of the session today, which is what are the strengths and weaknesses in attracting young talent. So there we will see a bit what's motivating students to get into forestry in the first place. And then about the challenges that job seekers and employers see, and there it might be quite interesting to see what drives career decisions of students. And lastly, a little bit on the skills, but there my analysis hasn't gone that far. And I think I need to move this window here. Huh? Right. So about the data, as I said, we did the survey, and it was a sole online survey last year from June to December. We collected it in 5 different languages, and most of our outreach was done by the 3 organizations. So we reached mostly students that are somehow already connected to EFI-IFSA or IUFRO, but also did a little bit of targeted outreach to different universities. Overall, we asked way too many questions. We had 62 questions, and I learned this lesson. Next time I will try and focus a bit more and pick a bit better. But nevertheless, we got over 1,600 responses. Nearly 1,000 of them made it till the end. Another couple of them dropped down along the way, but we still can use some of their responses. We asked both student and recent graduates, though the student population was a bit bigger, and overall the majority of the responses held a bachelor's degree or are currently pursuing a bachelor's degree. As for gender balance, we had quite a good balance, even have slightly more females responding. Right. So then a bit about the demographics also. Since it was a global study, it's always quite nice to see how this distributed. And I think we also, comparing to the numbers that FAO presented yesterday for their survey, I think we did quite good in all regions or all continents, though participation in Europe was much higher, and it proved surprisingly difficult to do the outreach in Africa, but also in North America. And for the focus of the students surveyed, the vast majority was enrolled in the classical forest science or forest engineering and management courses, but then also quite a few that had different focuses, but still considered themselves with a forest-related focus. Right, and now to some of the results, and starting with the motivation, I thought it was quite good to learn that the majority of the students, close to 70%, actually said yes, forestry was my first choice, and it was not just a consolation prize like we sometimes hear it. Though maybe noteworthy that especially in North America and Africa, it seems there are slightly less people that had forestry on their mind as a first choice. And I think that also resonates a bit with what we heard in the previous session, in the session 1.2, where Professor Fola also said that, for example, in Nigeria, there's quite a low interest in forestry, and people kind of get put into it. So this doesn't seem to be the larger picture, but there still seems to be quite a few people that don't think forestry, that's the one I go for right away. I'll skip this one. So then we asked, well, how important were different factors for this choice? And it turned out that beneficial work, which kind of means to be able to have a positive impact on environment or on communities, was quite high up on people's on students' agenda. That's what drives them to go into forestry. Same for job satisfaction and also a bit working conditions. We get to working outdoors a little later again, but earning potential, for example, seems not to be as much a decision making factor. And it begs a bit the question, is this because people that go into forestry naturally think earning is not so important to them because it's more about the having beneficial work, or is it because maybe also the earning potential in the forest sector is not that great, and that's why it's not something that draws people. Staying on this having a positive impact, if we now look a bit more into the career ambitions, almost all the respondents said yes, they agree, or rather agree with the statement that when deciding on a job, the impact on the environment is important to them. So maybe this whole idea of green jobs and this positive impact on environment is quite attractive and something that can draw people in, but also becomes more important to attract employees later on. Now, about being prepared, but also about the confidence in finding a job. Overall, most of the students felt quite prepared, but there is still some room for improvement. But for the confidence in finding a job, this was a bit less clear. And I looked at the numbers, but I don't have the graph here, also by regions, and it showed that especially in Europe and Latin America, the confidence in finding a job in the forest sector was not that high. So maybe that's something worth noting. We then also try to assess where do students want to work, and we asked them both for rating the different types of employers. And there, this might be a bit because of our population already having a slight tendency towards international interests, but international organizations and research organizations were very high on everyone's wish list, while the traditional public forest service, government, but also private forest services were somewhere in the middle field. And what ranked particularly low was self-employment. And we had this topic of entrepreneurship coming up a few times throughout this conference yet, and it seems this is not something students are either aware of yet or can imagine quite that well. But also what I found very interesting is that private companies, apart from Forest Service, were ranking the lowest out of all the options. So why do students not think private companies as this attractive? And what can be done about this maybe? Yes, and now for the conditions, I mentioned outdoors before. It still looks like this dream of working outdoors is very much prominent. So in Germany, we would have this image of the forester going into the forest with a felt hat and a four-wheel car and a duck sound by his side. That probably looks very different in different countries, but the sentiment still seems to be very popular among students that go into forestry. While forest office environments are a bit ambiguous. Some say yes, some say no, but generally there's not too much of a disagreement or agreement with it. And I thought it was quite interesting, and I wonder how much the pandemic impacted this picture of home office being not this attractive, because I think we hear a lot that home office is the way to go, but maybe it's not actually what students really want or young employees really want after all. Right. Just in general about career decisions, more than half of the students reported yes, they have a very clear, strong career goal, or they have at least 2 or more possible career goals. So they seem to be quite aware of it, and they also feel like they're knowledgeable about it, but I think there's still quite a bit of room for improvement in this. And maybe we can discuss later on how maybe also universities can help there to make students feel a bit more knowledgeable about the career options that are out there. And I think that's pretty much the last slide I'm going to show. So we asked for different experiences students had and how useful they thought they were for making a career decision. And the ones that were mentioned most often were field trips, national and international, work experiences, practical field exercises, but also talking to professors. And that was what they reported was quite helpful to them. But while talking to professors and also practical field work is quite common also around all universities apparently. Most students said they had experienced this before. There's still a bit of improvement possible for work experience, so maybe offering internships as part of the studies, and also for field trips, especially international ones. So maybe this is something where both the educational institutions and the employers can work on, and also work on together by offering excursions to potential workplaces, by doing job info days, but also by making work experiences and practica part of the curricula, and really making it possible for students to take this on. And I'm gonna stop here. And see if I can move on. Right. So that was my little bit of an introduction, and hopefully driving up or bringing up some questions for the discussion that will follow. And I would now very much like to introduce our three speakers. And I will start with Jan-Josef Dida, who's now an assistant professor at the University of the Philippines, Los Baños. And I asked him to tell us a little bit about himself and about his experiences within the university, and maybe also his first inputs for what does the forest sector actually offer for young people. So please, JJ, if you're there, the floor is yours.
Okay, so good afternoon to our audience and to my colleagues and friends in the IFSA. So I was a former IFSA official myself. And as mentioned by Lisa, I currently work at the University of the Philippines, Los Baños, particularly at the College of Forestry and Natural Resources as an assistant professor. Now, this university is a member of IUFRO and one of the tertiary education institutions in Southeast Asia that specializes in agriculture and forestry. In fact, this is where I obtained my bachelor's and master's degrees in forestry and natural resources conservation. In addition to producing forestry graduates, we also take part in research projects to complement the theories that we introduce to our students with actual field scenarios and experiences. We also do extension and public service activities to share forestry knowledge and new technologies to our stakeholders and communities. And whenever we talk to our partners at the local government offices, nonprofit organizations, and people's organizations, we get a glimpse of what is happening on the ground. So this process of learning, unlearning, and relearning helps us improve the way we deliver the subjects to our forestry students and help them become more equipped with relevant and useful knowledge and skills. Most of the times, the faculty and researchers from the university are invited to conduct research or be part of development projects that are not necessarily forestry in nature, but would require some skills of a forester. And our involvement to these projects serves as a form of like advertisement or awareness on the existence of a professional forester, which allows us also to market our graduates. Sometimes we also serve as the link or the bridge between our graduates and potential employers. Our college maintains its alumni network and connection with the different sectors by organizing events, conferences, and symposiums. So we are like the bridge between the forest sector employers and our forestry students who will become graduates later on. We also have a student recruitment committee at the college level that travels and goes around the country looking for the best and the brightest high school students. So we invite them to study forestry. And one of the weaknesses of the forestry sector when it comes to attracting young talents is the income, or the income that forestry will bring into. Young kids would often ask, what would become of us when we graduate? Are there enough good paying jobs that would help us alleviate our family from poverty? So these are, legitimate concerns or questions. And even if they decide to take up forestry, many of our forestry schools and universities, especially in the Philippines, would be needing additional support in terms of infrastructure, equipment, and human resources in order to produce well-equipped forestry graduates. So these universities and schools and educational institutions usually have zero to low quality equipment. So they need some additional support. I believe we have to address these weaknesses in the support side of the universities and the industry side in order to attract more forestry students. Well, the good news is that more young people become aware and chose to do something about environmental issues we face today. A few months ago, through Janice of IUFRO, a high school student asked me about deforestation and the importance of forest. And we also have young people, groups, and organizations participating in tree planting activities and other environmental activities. So what must be done is to supplement these efforts and activities with information that forestry exists, and forestry is a field and a discipline. We must inform these young people that forestry is there for them to explore. The emerging fields would also attract these young people to take up forestry, especially geospatial science, data science, cloud computing, and digital technology. Well, the strength of forestry is there. It's always there because we all need trees. We just have to connect to the young people and help them realize that they can become a good forestry or good forester after they graduate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, JJ. Uh, I quite like the idea of the university as the connector between the students and the employers, but I'm not sure that's true for all universities. As our second speaker, I would like to introduce Alex Onatunji. He is the current IFSA coordinator of the joint IUFRO-IFSA Task Force on Forest Education. And I would also like to ask Alex to tell us a little bit about himself and address his first question of what does the forest sector offer to attract young talent. So please, Alex, go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. Lisa, can you hear me? Hello, Lisa?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. I am privileged to be here and speaking alongside with Lisa, JJ, and Derek. And for me, my name is Alex Onatunji. I'm the IFSA coordinator for the Joint IFRO, IFSA Task Force on Forest Education. And my team, we work in capacity building of students, which we normally do through a lot of events, webinars, workshops, and trainings for students. Also, we are involved in research such as the Global Outlook on Forest Education, which we have been involved in for quite some time. And currently, we are also writing a book about forestry careers in Africa. And from my home perspective, one of the things that the forestry sector has to offer is the multidisciplinary nature of forest and looking at forestry beyond the trees. That is, students can venture into different aspects of forestry. They can think outside the box. And from my own background, I think one of the things students also like is the international possibilities with forestry. You could study forestry in your country, work in another country, work in an international organization or team. This is one of the key things I believe forestry students, that the forestry sector use to attract students. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Alex. So now we've heard the perspective of an educator as well of a very engaged student. And our last final speaker is Derek Neighbor. He's the president and CEO of the Forest Products Association of Canada, as well as the president of the International Council of Forest and Paper Associations. So now we have someone with some expertise on the employment side of things. And Derek, same to you. Please introduce yourself a little bit and also some remarks on this question of what does the forest sector have to offer?
Sure, my pleasure. Thanks, Lisa and Janice and all the organizers today for having me, and thanks to JJ and Alex for getting us off to a good start. I liked Alex's comments on the forestry for the trees, and I think as we work in Canada in terms of building that talent pipeline of the future, I think what we're struck by is, yeah, of course, we have the traditional jobs of pipe fitters and mechanical engineers in our industry, but there are growing jobs in forest conservation, in biodiversity, in the carbon climate action space, in the growing forest bioeconomy space. So I think one of the things that we're really focused on in Canada is people need to see themselves in potential job opportunities. And that starts with telling the story about the jobs that are out there and the meaningful work that can be done. And a couple of things struck me about the survey. The importance of beneficial work. We're seeing that especially younger workers are looking for more values-based outcomes and want to make a difference in their jobs. And we're seeing that here in Canada. I'd say Canada's pretty unique in the world in that the majority of our forestry activity is actually done on government land. As Lisa said, I not only run the industry association here in Canada, but I'm also in the last year of my term chairing the global association of all of the different forest industry associations from countries from South Africa to Sweden to Australia to Japan. And one of the areas where Canada is very different, we don't have plantation forestry in Canada. We have what we would call working forests, forests that are owned either on Indigenous lands or provincial government lands, which means all of our forestry in Canada is done under robust public consultation, local science, local values represented. So a very, very different framework in Canada that I know excites a lot of people in terms of their ability to. In Canada, we're on a path of reconciliation with our Indigenous people. We're looking to move our women working in our workforce beyond 17%. We see opportunities with new Canadians in terms of being part of that talent pipeline of the future. So, I see our job is to promote. It's to celebrate success. It's to allow people to see themselves in the job opportunities. I'm also struck from the survey results on the earning potential, because in Canada, these are multi-generational in a lot of cases, and in almost all cases, family supporting jobs. The majority of our companies in Canada would tell you that more than half of their jobs would be in six-figure dollar amounts here in terms of Canadian dollars. So I see in different parts of the world. And I think that's the interesting piece here too, is we have this conversation, appreciating that some regional contexts might be different. And in the case of Canada, it is an opportunity to do good things by the climate, by biodiversity, and to actually raise and support your family. So I think the only other thing I'd add is we have a number of partnerships we work on. I think, it's in JJ's case, I think the role universities and some of our universities and colleges do an excellent job in terms of trying to provide that bridge or that move from academia to practitioner or from school to meaningful job. We've got a number of other groups that focus on Indigenous youth programming, young people, getting them co-op and job experiences. And I think that's all really important. So I'll maybe leave it there, but I'm excited about the topic. I think we've got an opportunity to do more. And as we say in Canada, we've got as many white coats as we do safety vests in our industry, and that's going to continue to evolve over time.
Right. Thank you for this first round of introductions. And I think we already heard quite a lot of very valid points and a lot of examples why the forest sector has a lot to offer. So maybe it's up to everyone now to find ways to make everyone else aware of this. So let's move on a little bit to maybe a slightly more difficult subject, which is the challenges that job seekers, but also employers face today in the job market, and what both sides, education, but also employers, can maybe do to help overcome them. And I will ask Alex first to maybe tell us a bit of from what, in his experience, the biggest challenges for fresh university graduates are when entering the job market, and maybe especially what the situation in Africa is like, and your Joint Task Force on Education, IFSA-IUFRO, is there anything that you can do to help there?
Okay, thank you very much, Lisa. And for me, the main challenges that job seekers face is that they are looking for a job that does not exist. And why I said job that does not exist is that most times when during our trainings, we are trained to work in the government sector, in the formal sector, or maybe with the research organizations or in the university. But unfortunately, there are very little jobs in this kind of organizations now for graduates. And this makes graduates keep looking for a job where they can't find one. Then another thing is the ability of the graduates to be able to think beyond the box. Sorry, can I continue?
Please
Can I
go
continue?
ahead.
Yes, I mentioned that I'm looking for a job that does not exist in the sense that sometimes we look on the graduates have been taught to look for a job in the teaching, the research sectors, and the government agencies are not able to employ all the number of graduates coming out of the university. So a lot of people keep searching for jobs that naturally may not be easy to find. But one thing is, one of the things that I think is the problem is competencies and experiences. Most times students are glued only to their lectures and theories or things learned within the confines of the university. Many students don't want to expand themselves. They don't want to have further training and develop their capacities in leadership, in organizing things. And this can be a problem when they're looking for a job. So, and also from my own view from the African state, one of the problem also could be political situation whereby students could apply, graduates could apply for a job and may not be employed or may not easily find the job. So, and for me, what I think educational institutions can do is to bridge the gap between the curriculum and work with the potential employers of the labors. For example, we did a lot of internship in the Research Institute, Forestry Research Institute of Nigeria. But in my view, almost every student who study forestry in Nigeria have one thing or the other to do in this research station. And this is not a good thing for us because it only limits us that, okay, the jobs is in this place, whereas not all the jobs are there. So the educational institutions should try to bring students to different kind of fields, different kind of opportunities which they can seek, such as in the private and in the entrepreneurial sector. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much, Alex. And this being trained to work in the government sector and then having very little jobs there actually, I think, was very much the situation here in Europe, or at least Germany, some decades back. And then there was a lot done to also not just sell the forest sector to attract people to study it, but also to really sell. There was a campaign to sell the educated forester to other sectors. And now, because foresters are so multiverse and so holistically trained, maybe they're also attractive to then work in other fields if really there isn't that many forest jobs anymore. So this has changed a bit now. We have more of an employees market and people really try to find the right candidates. But I'm now interested to maybe hear from Derek how the situation is in Canada and what the biggest challenges for employers are when seeking new staff.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. I'll start quickly with a couple of the employer challenges. I think in some parts of the country, we have an aging workforce in Canada, and we need more workers in our forest sector over the next 10 years. The challenge we have in some forestry communities in Canada is that we have had a lot of job losses historically over the past 10, 20 years. In British Columbia, for example, in the western part of Canada, we've had about 24 mill closures just in the last 3 or 4 years because of some fiber constraints, which have been outcomes of pest and fire outbreaks. And because we manage our forests to keep them as forests forever in Canada, if large swaths of forest are destroyed by pests or fire, that means the annual allowable cut would go down in terms of respecting those principles of sustainability. So I think one of the challenges is in some cases where traditional forestry communities have seen a lot of job losses, there might, mom or dad who worked in forestry might not be so keen to encourage their son or daughter to do so. So I think in some parts of the region, that's a barrier. In other parts, our industry in Canada tends to be more rural and northern and more remote. I think that means a better quality of life and greater opportunity to be in the outdoors for some people who would prefer to live in downtown Toronto or Vancouver. That can be more limiting for them. So that ability to attract good people, and that's why in our northern and rural communities in Canada, things like good hospitals and good schools and high-speed internet access are really, really important, because those are things that families want to see when they're going to be settling in a community. So I think there's a number of things that we're looking at to try to improve that and try to attract more people to work in a number of these communities. I would say companies are also challenged through competition. I find quite often we can see in Canada, which is a pretty heavy natural resource economy, a lot of people moving from the mining sector to the oil and gas or energy sector to forestry. And depending on the boom and bust cycles in natural resources, that can always be a challenge if you're a forestry operation with a mine down the street where you might be able to make more money. That's always a consideration. I want to flip it to the challenge on the employer or the prospective employer or the student side. I think number one, it is just understanding where those opportunities are. And one of the links I'll share with Lisa in terms of follow-up is we've developed a labor market assessment tool that really does some mapping in terms of not only salaries, but cost of living in community A versus community B, what jobs are going to be available in the next 5 years to try to help match those educational planning requirements that need to be done. So I think understanding what's out there and making sure people can get the skills they need and the education they need to be ready for those jobs in a few years. And I see our colleges and universities in Canada playing an important facilitating role in terms of working closely with industry to do that mapping. The other thing, maybe my final comment will be, we got to think, what are the barriers to not only the broader community, but maybe more focused minority groups. So I think of Indigenous groups, I think of women, I think of young people, and in some cases the barriers can be as simple as access to childcare or having a driver's license. So our companies are being very creative in terms of trying to address some of those fundamental needs, because if we want to get more women in the workforce, we better have pretty darn good childcare programs. If we want to get more Indigenous youth working, we might need to run busing programs from some of our Indigenous communities. So I think we got to think differently, but I do think there are a number of barriers, but big part of our job here in Canada is trying to overcome those. So maybe I'll leave that there, Lisa.
Right. Thank you, Derek. And I'm quite looking forward to this labor market assessment tool. That sounds very, very interesting. I think the remoteness is probably not only an issue in Canada, there maybe particularly because of the vastness, but I think this is something that can actually be said for quite a few places. So quite happy you brought this up, because I think it wasn't brought up so much in previous conversations I had. Now, lastly, I would like to ask JJ to also maybe give a bit of perspective there from the educational institution side. So we heard a couple of the challenges now from students, but also employers are facing. So what is it maybe that the educational institutions can do to here increase awareness of the different careers, but also to help with the choices there?
Okay, so for me, I think it's really important to hear what the industry says and what the students say as well. Ideally, the work of the educational institutions does not end or does not stop after they have recruited, retained, and cleared their students after graduation. Now, these institutions must ensure that the forestry program offerings are updated and would respond to the needs of the environment, the society, and the economy. They can conduct market studies like what Derek has mentioned. They can conduct needs assessments or interviews with different stakeholders. Now, the forestry program outcomes must be reviewed every few years so that the emerging trends and the demands of the different stakeholders and sectors are considered. So, an example of which is 2 years ago in our university, we revised our Bachelor of Science in Forestry program to include an internship subject. So we don't have this internship subject before as a requirement before graduation. So this subject allows our forestry students to experience the working environment and interact with professionals for 1 month, no? And it will help our forestry students become aware of the possible careers in the future and maybe the tracks that they would like to take upon. And unfortunately, our internship subject for this year is in the limbo because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So we are trying to schedule this next year. Another way of increasing the awareness of public possible careers in forestry is to intensify the extension and public service initiatives of the universities. Educational institutions must reach out to the communities, industries, potential employers through capacity building activities, sharing of best practices, and technology transfer. I guess it is important for the industries to really learn what is the latest technology like remote sensing or the use of harvesting technology that is very high technology, something like that. And they must effectively show to the decision makers and key people that they would need forestry graduates. So I would say that this is only possible if the educational institutions, especially the public ones, have enough support to implement these activities. So if you do not have a budget for your university, then you cannot conduct extension activities, technology transfer, and public service. So there must be an enabling environment for the forestry sector's employers to operate, and at the same time enough support for the educational institutions to improve its programs and activities. Well, nevertheless, forestry educational institutions can form collaborations, partnerships, and sharing of knowledge with other institutions through MOUs and agreements. So perhaps our employers and industries can support the education of a forestry student through scholarships or thesis support grants so that our students will be linked with our future employers, something like that. And these are good jumpstart activities that connect forestry students to the employers. Finally, educational institutions must engage their alumni for any support that they can give. And these alumni are important because they provide feedbacks based on experiences from the outside world. And they can help forestry graduates from the school get employed to their respective sectors. So I believe forestry education is really about forming partnerships, constant communications, and constant sharing.
Great. Thank you very much, JJ. Yes, I think cooperation is quite important on all ends. And I hope you find a way to still get your internship program done despite all the limitations of the COVID situation at the moment. We've actually offer in our project some traineeships, and after waiting for a year, we resolved to having them remotely. This, of course, does not work for regular forest jobs that take place in the forest, but when it comes to research-related things, that actually worked out surprisingly well. So even though it's not the true hands-on experience for at least some things, this can be a solution. Right, I would like to take a look at our Mentimeter, since now a few people have actually put down some comments. So I see from the job seeker side, there isn't enough available jobs, and Of course, that can be an issue in quite a lot of regions. Then we see that the institutions need to help the students acquire the right skills, especially soft skills. And I think that was mentioned yesterday as well, quite a bit. I found this one quite interesting. So someone wrote here, in my experience, some final year students often suffer from a lack of confidence in their ability, which prevents them from preparing job applications. Employers can help by offering graduate training programs and aim specifically at this group. I think that is true that a lot of times students come out of university and they don't feel quite adequately equipped, even though that's not true. So this first initial step of making this experience that on the other side, everyone in German, we would say also only boils with water, can be quite important and very simple. So giving them a chance once helps them to find the confidence to go ahead. Now, does this move? Yes. Here's some agreement with Derek on employers need to think about differently about flexibility and part-time work for new staff. That would definitely help attract a more diverse group, and I think that's quite relevant, at least in the Northern Hemisphere, that being more flexible and finding solutions that allow also for a family or different situations is quite important. And then the last comment I found was, as a program director for programs at bachelor and master's level in the UK, my experience over the last few years is that there are insufficient graduates to meet demands of employers. There's a need to increase enrollments on forestry and related programs. Well, so there's both ends. Sometimes in some situations, we lack the people interested in the programs, while in other there's a lack of jobs to offer. So finding this right balance and maybe addressing it right also in the regional context is a message to take here, that it can't be one solution fits all. Right. Moving to address maybe a little bit this last question. So we talked quite a bit of what is the attraction of the sector and what are our issues that we face. So now a little bit more specific. What are the skills that are needed to actually succeed in today's forest sector? And how can they be obtained? Because someone mentioned soft skills here, and yesterday we actually had an all-female panel, and their soft skills came up quite a lot. So can they actually be acquired through formal education, or is there needs for other avenues? And I would like to ask Derek first. So what, in your perspective, are the most needed skills today? And maybe also which skills are really hard to find in applicants? What's lacking?
Yeah, and this follows a question Maria had for me in the chat, and I think it does really, it's going to vary from region to region, and even in Canada, it varies from region to region in terms of where the gaps are. The labor market tool I was telling you about, I think I'll give you a real good sense in from a Canadian context in terms of where the job opportunities are going to be. But you know, we're traditionally pipe fitters, power engineers, heavy mechanics, electricians, millwrights, IT are some of the areas where we see growing need, I would say, across the industry. In the forestry, in the woodlands operations, in the forestry space, I would say a couple of things. I would say, you know, language skills are really important. We've got a lot of great international students coming to study at UBC, at University of British Columbia, University of Toronto, and you know, whether you're working in the province of Quebec, which is French, or whether you're working in the rest of Canada, which is more English, you know, those language skills are really, really important in terms of the ability to find jobs and advance in those jobs. I'd also say, you know, as we look to where the industry is going and where the solutions are, we've got a huge opportunity in climate action, in fighting climate change, and to leverage the power of our forests and sustainable forest management and wood products. I see a great opportunity in the growing forest bioeconomy, which means there's a lot of these different jobs. You know, whatever you can get from a barrel of oil, you can get from a tree. And that's the mindset in Canada right now. And we're really seeing a lot more. We're seeing the oil and gas sector in Canada turning to wood fiber to help build some of their new biofuel opportunities. We're seeing steel and cement manufacturing facilities looking to wood fiber residuals to decarbonize their operations. So I would say that climate action carbon space is a growing space. I would say broader ESG frameworks. You know, we have the UN SDGs that are driving a lot of our policy and a lot of the way we're thinking about how we work and how we do our work. But financial markets are increasingly moving to these ESG or environmental, social, governance factors that the financial community is looking to. So that's a growing, emerging space. We've got a lot more people in Canadian forestry working there in terms of ESG reporting and those kinds of initiatives. And I'd also say the areas of specialty areas like biodiversity and that bioeconomy space, I think hold real promise. So it really depends what you're interested in. It really depends where you are in the world. But I think looking at where the demand is going to be in 5-10 years is a good indication in terms of the planning that might need to be done.
Right, thank you. I very much like this. What you can get from a barrel of oil, you can get from a tree. I'll take note of this one. So I heard language, but also quite some specific skills. And looking at the word cloud here, communication comes actually up quite a bit, because I think it's not just language, but also communicating with different people, communicating with experts on one hand, with different stakeholders on another. And I think that's increasingly more important. It's not just the lonely forester in the forest anymore, but actually really working in this field of different interests. So we heard a couple of skills that are needed now. Maybe to Alex, what other avenues do you see outside of maybe the regular education, where not all of this can always be taught, for a student that wants to improve? Where could they maybe go and find some of those, or train some of those missing competencies?
Okay, thank you very much, Lisa. And in my opinion, one of the places you could get this experiences are internship and volunteering and leadership skills. For example, in the leadership and the volunteering, it could be even unpaid volunteering or internship experiences. Through these experiences, you have an idea of how the organization you are seeking employment works, what are the skills they need, and what skills you need to develop. And yourself, you'll be able to rebrand yourself and project yourself and network yourself to potential employers. Also, on the leadership experiences and international experiences, for example, most employers are looking for someone who can be in charge, someone who can take control of things, someone who can work and collaborate with others. So if you can build your leadership experiences, and one of such opportunities is the International Forestry Student Association, and which I have been serving for quite some time now. And with my service to IFSA, I have been able to work with quite a lot of people from different regions of the world and with different perspective and view of forestry as a whole. So this has enriched my own knowledge. So I would advise that students should look at opportunities both locally, nationally, regionally, as well as internationally in building their leadership skills and experiences. So I think these are the main skills that will be needed, and also the social skills, the ability to communicate, the ability to um, resolve or resolute conflict, the ability to work in an interdisciplinary kind of team. That is, you are not saying no, it is only the forestry view that must be heard or must be listened to. You can listen to others and try to reason on different views of forest, different views about the use of forest, different views and different policies that affect forest. So I think these are some of the needed skills that will be needed, and basically you can get them through leadership, through volunteering, internship, and as well mentorship. You could look for mentors in the area or in the field which you want to seek for job. If I want to work as a researcher, I can seek for mentorship from researchers in organizations that I think I'm looking for job into. Thank you.
Right. Thanks, Alex, for this call of being active and finding those different opportunities and really just being proactive to seek those experiences one needs. Lastly, on this, maybe to JJ. So how can educational institutions then ensure that their staff, but also their curricula stay up to date and can actually address those emerging issues? Because oftentimes that's a slow process of changing a curricula.
Yes, it is indeed a very slow process. It takes you like 3 to 4 to 5 years before it can change. And I think the most challenging part for an educational institution is ensuring that their staff and curricula is up to date and still relevant to the needs of the society and environment. Um, the teaching and research personnel usually gets up-to-date information when they obtain their advanced degrees. Well, especially outside their home country. So we are actually encouraged to study outside our home country so that we gain different perspectives, gain up-to-date knowledge from good universities outside the Philippines in our case. And that is also my track a few years from now. And then what happens next? Now, this is actually where incentives must come into play. The administrators of these educational institutions must strongly support the pursuit of, for example, postdoctoral engagements, research development, and knowledge generation activities. So our educational institutions must also organize perhaps continuing education sessions in collaboration with different stakeholders so that there will be mixing of knowledge or exchange of ideas and best practices. Certain professions in the Philippines, for example, they have this continuing professional development mechanism where professionals need to learn and retool themselves before they get their identification cards renewed. And some universities also require advanced degrees before they get to a certain academic rank. So these controls are somehow effective in making sure that the staff will become more competent and updated with the latest trends and technologies in forestry. Now, one of the thrusts of many universities is internationalization and increase in graduate and international students. That is why we need to encourage our universities to increase or strengthen their international linkages, um, join consortiums, so that there will be mobility and exchange of knowledge among different universities. So in Southeast Asia, for example, I believe we now have a professional master's program and scholarships where students stay at different universities. So this is pretty much like the Erasmus Mundus program. And I also believe there are the same mechanisms in other regions. We must also encourage our universities and learning institutions to develop short online courses or massive open online courses like the Asia Pacific Forestry Education Coordination Mechanism of the University of British Columbia. So they offer these online courses where you can do these topics on your own pace and on your own time. On the at the grassroots level, the staff must immerse themselves with the communities, indigenous groups, through research activities or extensions, so that emerging issues and changes on the ground are identified as well. So the ideal scenario for the educational institutions are we must be aware of the emerging issues at the international level and at the same time at the local level. And this will make you be more equipped with the necessary improvements in the delivery of subjects and program outcomes. So you can adjust and you can adapt based on these changes in the international and at the ground level. So you can also propose new offerings or electives in the forestry curriculum, but the program itself must be reviewed as well. So in our university, we incorporated forest-based enterprises, which is from the forest business management as a required subject in curriculum. And perhaps in the next years, certain subjects in forestry might be merged into one, and new subjects will be added in the curriculum. But behind these initiatives are well-equipped and updated human resources. So our administrators must provide an enabling environment and desire for the staff to retool and relearn. Our faculty and researchers must also strive to be part of international networks like IUFRO and local organizations for holistic view of these emerging trends. The forestry sector employers can also provide and share their insights, what needs to be changed to the educational to the programs. So I would say that everyone in the forestry sector has a role to play in making sure that our curriculum is really up to date.
All right, thank you, JJ. And yes, updated human resources, I think, are quite important, and lifelong learning should be something not only the educators, but everyone strives for. So I will close this presentation now. There we go. So I can see you all a bit better. And at this point, I would like to open the floor for the audience to ask any questions to our speakers today. And I will take a look at my little sheet that my colleagues prepared so nice in the background, if there was anything I missed on the chat that we could pick up right now. I see one question here for Alex, or a comment. I've done quite a lot of work in the African continent in forestry and woodworking industry. How to overcome the large informal market that affects opportunities for valuable and effective forestry and products activities? Any thoughts? So in short, any thoughts on how to overcome this large, even informal market?
Okay, thank you very much, Lisa. In addition to my comment on the chat, that universities should prepare their graduates to look at opportunities in these informal opportunities, especially in Africa. And I would give an example from the University of Ilorin. And Dr. Fala is also one of the speakers in 1.2. He took a course on forest entrepreneurship in one of his set of students. And what we'll discover is that he took the course in an holistic manner, training the student how to establish their business, how to register their business. And today, as I speak to you, about 20 to 25% of those students have formed one businesses or the other, and they are doing well. So one of the things I would advise universities is to encourage their students to look at opportunities outside the formal sector, outside the research or universities. There are a lot of jobs and opportunities in this sector. And I can say what we need to do is to open the eyes of the students to see these opportunities and to take good care of them. And I think two examples is two of the students are into apiculture business, that is honey production and processing. And they're making quite a lot of money. Maybe soon they'll be richer than their lecturers. So thank you.
Great, thank you, Alex, for this very eloquent response. And again, if you have any questions, please share in the chat or raise your hand. We're small enough a group that we can just have a discussion here as well. I see one in the chat right now for Derek. Derek, could you share the various stakeholders involved in the forestry in Canada and who the main employers are?
Yeah, we have a lot, and going back to one of my first comments around public nature of forestry in Canada just means that we have a lot of rights holders and stakeholders. So that would range from Indigenous communities and Indigenous leadership to unions, organized labor, to environmental and conservation groups that operate on the ground locally. Of course, local governments and chambers of commerce and are always interested in business development and economic development opportunities. Our stakeholders include snowmobile and recreation clubs, hunters and trappers and fishers who also use our shared forests and forested areas for recreational and other purposes. And then we do, of course, have a robust, outside of our full-time employees, a very robust network of contractors who would be doing everything from planting trees to hauling logs to harvesting trees. So it's a pretty robust web of stakeholders and really a lot of different opportunities in Canadian forestry. And Khalil's point here is true. A lot of students get their first start. We plant in Canada, we plant upwards of 600 million seedlings every year as part of our commitment to forest sustainability. And on top of that, our government has just committed to plant another 2 billion trees over the next 10 years. So a lot of tree planting jobs, and quite often it's tough work, but quite often a lot of our employees get their taste of forestry and the opportunity to be in the outdoors by planting trees.
Right. Thank you, Derek, for this explanation on how the sector in Canada works and how to find an entry there. I see one hand up, so Bello Rufai, if you want, please unmute yourself.
Hello, Lisa. Thank you so much. I have a question to Alex. My name is Bello Rufai, a young faculty member with the Department of Forestry and Wildlife Management here in Bayero University, Nigeria. We are about to initiate a Forestry Students Association here because it's like a new department we are having. So the question is, how are we going to have a registration with the International Forestry Students Association?
Okay, thank you very much. And you can send an email to the regional rep, or you could also, I'll put my email here, and you could send me an email. I'll connect you to the right person to get your universities registered.
Okay, we are highly grateful, Alex. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Bello, and thank you, Alex, for this very quick solution. If there is no one who immediately wants to ask anything, I would maybe ask JJ. So Derek touched on this before, that it's also about making plans and assessing the needs in the next couple of years to be sure that the skills are there and prepared for. So talking about planning for the next 5 to 10 years, digitization is still a major topic. How is this visible in the studies?
I guess we really have to get in touch with these industries and really, first of all, get to know these technologies and perhaps learn this first so that we could incorporate them in our forestry activities. And afterwards, then we can plan for its incorporation in curriculum. So actually, the faculties are the first people who need to learn those things so that they could transfer this knowledge to these students. So the important part here is to learn first the technology among the faculty and researchers, and then try to incorporate in lectures in certain subjects, and then let's see in the future, in a few years' time, if we can incorporate this as a formal subject in the curriculum. So something like that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, JJ. And Derek, in that regard of digitization, what kind of changes are we seeing implemented in practice at the moment?
Yeah, well, it's happening in different parts of the business. So in the drone technology and a whole host of new ways of doing more accurate work in the forest in terms of identifying where species at risk might be, or different animals or birds or fish might be. I'd say that's one part of it. I think the pandemic has fast tracked a lot of just changing the approach to paperwork and working with third-party contractors who come onto mill properties. I think the pandemic's really changed a lot of the thinking, I know, here in Canada in terms of some of the compliance pieces and how we do that work. And then I would say also, especially in our pulp and paper mills, our packaging mills, a lot more automation, which really is changing the types of jobs that are required. We're moving to a higher value type manufacturing jobs than maybe some of the more traditional labor jobs here in Canada.
Mm-hmm. So both technology and digitization still on the rise and affecting all aspects. Very well. I see one more hand up. Yusuf, if you want to unmute yourself, please go ahead.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Yusuf.
How are you? My question is, I am from a country here in Sierra Leone where the forestry sector do not seem to be attracting the interest of students seeking to build their careers in the future, and probably because of the status of forestry and forest education. And first is a question I want to ask, and maybe a contribution also I'll make. The question is, how can we make forestry education more attractive and for students to see it as a potential? Because nowadays, most of the time, we students leaving the university are much more concerned about jobs, how we get jobs, how we get career, how we try to live through difficult times, particularly in countries like this where job is very scarce. And my contribution I want to make, in order for forestry education to be more effective and sustainable, I think there has to be a way we can introduce it from the primary level of education. Like here we have the primary school, the secondary school, the junior secondary school, instead of forestry to be just a course which you start knowing about when you get to tertiary institution. I guess it's best if we start propagating the knowledge in the kids from the time they are just 6 years old or 7 years old, maybe when they grow up with such knowledge, by the time they get to do a lot of things when they're faced with problems like job scarcity. That's my
Right, thank you, Yusuf. If I caught it correctly, that was more a comment than a direct question.
I might weigh in, Lisa, on that. I think there's some really smart comments there. And I think some countries are doing a better job of introducing forestry at those younger levels. I think, I know, talking to my colleagues in Scandinavia, I think Scandinavia does a tremendous job of trying to introduce some of that learning early on. I think we have an obligation also, we're typically, in Canada anyway, foresters typically aren't the best communicators and are not really always great at telling our story and the practical things that we're doing and the benefits that we're bringing. And I think that's something we need to do better. The other thing I'll add, even to get that attention, I'm seeing it in Canada. And once again, regional differences are going to exist here, but I'll tell you, in Canada, our companies have been focusing a lot more on social justice issues. Some of the hardships and the injustices that our Indigenous communities have faced, the movement in North America coming out of the murder of George Floyd last summer in the Black Lives Matter movement. June in Canada is Pride Month to support contributions of the LGBT community. So I think when it comes to a values perspective, I know our companies in Canada and our workers, our younger workers especially, are looking at for their companies to be doing good things by the environment and by society. So I think that's another area where we can speak to some of those opportunities and where people can be proud or want to work for a certain company because of the values they represent.
Right. Thank you, Derek. And I was a bit disappointed because at the same time as our session, there is this session in another breakout room that very much discusses this how can we change public perception and how can we actually communicate the job of the forester and the importance of forestry in general. So I think it will be interesting to later today, I think it's at 1 o'clock, to hear their consolidated outputs and see if there was more bright ideas of how to do this storytelling. Right. If there is no more immediate questions, then I would move on to our last and final part, which is the key recommendations. And some of you already sent me some, but maybe starting with JJ, just a little sum up conclusion, and also what would be your key recommendations for forest education towards employment? What is needed?
Okay, so to sum up, in the context of forest education and employment juncture, I would like to highlight the call to action number 8 presented yesterday, which is strengthening forestry education, stakeholder engagement, and partnerships. So without forestry students, the forestry educational institutions would lose its meaning and purpose. At the same time, without our forestry sector employers, there is no point in educating and molding foresters. So we need to improve the linkage, partnerships, and collaborations among educational institutions from secondary to tertiary education levels and even the vocational institutions, and with different sectors including private organizations, the business sectors, and the government, so that we identify the trends, the skill demands, and the need for forestry graduates from prospective employers. Okay, so this is part of the modification and changes in the curricula. So one of the comments earlier is about what to do if your place does not have a good forestry sector. And I would say that you create the demand. So if your area does not have a forestry demand, then you create a demand in that area. And for example, in the Philippines, we do not have much of timber business companies. So our forestry graduates are employed in conservation activities, in mapping, surveying, even in digital activities like programming. And this is where, you know, forestry graduates become sort of flexible. So they become flexible in the absence of an actual timber activity. Okay. And in order to do this, there must be continuous and additional support to forestry learning institutions and forestry sector employers, perhaps through funding and enabling government policies.
Right, very well. Thank you, JJ. So call for more collaboration. I saw Khalil, you wanted to speak, so, and you can't raise your hand, so please, Khalil, go ahead.
Thanks so much, Elisa. Yeah, I'm a co-host, so I'm not able to raise my hand. No, I just wanted to make a comment. Really engaging discussions in the breakout session. I think there's a lot of discussion of sort of how do we start teaching about forestry education at a younger age, and I think that that's an important point. But, you know, one thing that I reflect on from my own story or my own entry point into the sector is that I didn't really understand a lot about forestry, and so, you know, in Canada we have many foresters that come from a sort of forestry legacy. They grow up in small towns. It's often a rural kind of enterprise. But I think there's sort of the new forester or new pipeline of foresters that come from different sciences and don't really know a lot about forestry, but end up finding their way into the sector. And I think that's sort of where I sit. And so, you know, when it comes to what does a degree provide to that new kind of forester, you know, for me, it's about it's about being very broad in kind of the opportunity. So foresters that are now coming into forest programs realize that through that degree program, they can study and get a number of jobs. It's not just being a forester in a kind of in a timber or in kind of a traditional forestry sense, but the application is really, really broad and they can pivot to different sectors as well. So it's less looking at kind of the smaller pie, but of the bigger pie, how many people are then coming into forestry? Yeah, anyhow, more of a comment than anything. Whatever to you, Lisa. And I think you're muted, so we can't hear you. Sorry.
Thanks. Thank you for the comment. I think it's quite true that there's more to forestry than meets the eye, and more opportunities coming out of a degree than you often would expect when you get into it. I'll since JJ also mentioned it, I post here again the link to the call to action from the conference. And to make use of the last final minutes, I would like to ask Alex also to give his little sum up and key recommendations.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll quickly use this moment to tell the audience about an African book project we have been working on for the past 1 year and a half. And it's about summarizing some of the key opportunities in forestry sector in Africa. It will be launched soon. Then also, from my own perspective, I believe that there is no shortcut to success than preparation. Students should look at what opportunities they want to look or take up in the future and prepare towards them. There's no other route to success than this. So that is my own personal opinion. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Alex. And our countdown just started, but Derek, if you want to make use of it, your final key recommendation, 40 seconds.
Yeah, I liked what JJ said. I see the importance of collaboration, and especially trying to map to those jobs of the future. And we're active right now with a group of colleges across Canada to look at what are those green opportunities in the forest sector to move to a lower carbon economy. I think the low carbon decarbonization space is a huge opportunity, and partnership is going to help us get there.
Very well. Well, thank you all for being with us today. Thank you to the speakers, but also thank you to the audience.